Okay, we're back for another Restructuring My Business Out Loud. This is part 3, I think, of a little series, and I think this is going to be the last one. I'm ready to wrap this puppy up. And it's really been interesting just to witness my own energy around this over the last couple weeks. Part 1 and 2 ended up being a month apart. That was interesting. I reflected on that in part 2, so make sure to go listen if you haven't already. And also, if you haven't been listening, this one I think is going to be able to stand on its own. So you could just listen to this one and probably get everything that you need, because the first 2 really were just sharing my own experience and a lot of vulnerability and a lot of tangents and different threads being woven. And so obviously there's still value there, but if you're here to really just get some tangible tips on how to restructure your own business, then this one is going to meet that need for you. I even have notes, and I never write notes, but like I said, I want to wrap this puppy up. I'm watching my own energy deflate around this, and it's interesting because I've been reflecting on this in the way creation moves through me, and I talked about that in the last episode too, just in getting really personal with your own creative processes, specifically in relation to your menstrual cycle if you have one, or the lunar cycle, and just even like seasons and internally like your own rhythms, right? And so beginning to witness when you teeter into perfectionism or procrastination, or just what the process is from like when an idea or like a seed is planted in your head, and the unraveling of what that seed has to do to get actually into a tangible something, right? Into fruition. And it's really, really interesting when we start paying attention to that and finding the patterns that are unique to us. Because that's the thing, is like creation moves differently for each person. And I can't tell you what that looks like for you. You have to experiment with that, and you have to like witness yourself move through the process of creation several times. And even after several times, it's still going to continue to be unique because you are always evolving and you are constantly refining and just giving yourself little cheat codes and hacks to maybe strengthen and create more efficiency in your creative process. So I just want to name that. Anyways, for the sake of this episode, like I said, I have notes. I should probably pull them up as opposed to just talking, because otherwise this is going to turn into however many minutes. So yeah, okay, what I was going to share is noticing that the energy towards this has deflated. And I think part of that is because I did let it draw out way longer than I expected. I also have been recognizing that I have demand avoidance. I think I've known this for a long time, but as I've been unraveling my own autism, there's a whole profile type for this. And I am not going to pathologize myself here. I definitely don't fit into the entire criteria of it, but I've been learning more and more about how demand avoidance shows up for some people. And I see it very, very clearly in my daughter as well. And I was actually talking to my mom about this, and there's like really vivid examples reflecting back to my childhood. Like an example is, I remember I would get in screaming matches with my mom because obviously like I had chores, right? I was supposed to be a contributing member of the household, and it was my chore to unload the dishwasher. And I remember saying this many, many times, that I have no problem emptying the dishwasher. I just don't want to be told to do it. Yeah, there's this real threat to my nervous system when I'm told to do something. And that's really, really confusing because I've also been a people pleaser and a total good girl. And so I want to please. And so it doesn't make sense. I'm not going to try to make it make sense. I've just noticed that there is this demand avoidance. And another place this showed up, and it continues to show up in different aspects of my life, where in my childhood, like I remember I did like horseback riding for a while. I took piano lessons for a while. I did ballet. I was really into like architecture and like drawing floor plans and like blueprints for houses. And with all of those things, the fun completely got sucked out of me as soon as there was a demand with it. So in piano, as soon as there was a recital, in horseback riding, and as soon as they wanted me to like compete and do like, what's it called? Like jumping, like horse jumping shows. I never did that. I liked riding a horse just for fun. I didn't want there to be like a performance to it. And then with the interest in like architecture and designing houses and floor plans, that continues to be a really big special interest of mine, but I absolutely do not want it to be my job. I do not want to demand from it And anyways, that was a total tangent, but it's just been interesting to notice how this little creative side quest ended up feeling like a demand because I knew it wasn't complete, but also the energy is like over there now. So we are wrapping this puppy up, and I really want to make sure that this episode actually gives you some tangible things to play with so that you actually can be restructuring your own business as well, whether out loud or internally, probably internally, because most people don't do this. But one thing that I have written down on my notes is magnetism. And I want to talk about this first because I think magnetism really is like this secret weapon that we all have access to in our businesses. And there's obviously different pathways to get to it. I would argue that a large part of it is beginning to understand yourself and obviously beginning to stop cock blocking your own like creative expression. But another really big piece to this is following what feels alive. And there's vulnerability required and a deep level of self-trust to be able to do that. And I think, speaking from experience and like just, my own personal journey in all of this, I have held a lot of judgment, maybe even shame around changing my mind a lot and pivoting. Because for some reason, I was holding on to this belief that basically like being, I don't want to say attached, but getting really clear on this like one thing, and like in the context of business, having like a signature offer and running it several times a year and beginning to be recognized and sought after for that one thing. I was really holding on to that as like what I thought I was going after. I thought that's what I wanted. And so every time I've pivoted and every time I've like changed my mind and basically like jumped ship on an offer, there's been a lot of shame and judgment for myself. I've been calling myself flaky, and I've been calling myself like inconsistent. And obviously this is all like dripping down from patriarchy and like colonization, right? Like I can see right through it. And so this is where like working through your own internalized oppression is so important. But my point here is when we're following what's alive, there is going to be inconsistency, right? Because we are cyclical creatures. There is going to be a flavor of flakiness. And I don't even want to use that word because I feel like there's such a negative connotation to it. But you have to get really comfortable. This is actually my next bullet point, is you have to get really comfortable with changing your mind. You have to get really comfortable with refining and course correcting and letting things go. And like collectively, we have a really hard time with like that part of the creation process. Like that's the death and the letting go and it's just that like liminal in between space where you don't necessarily know what's next. There's darkness there. There's insecurity and scarcity there if we fall into that energy, right? So getting really comfortable with that is really, really important. It's a big piece to following what's alive. But the magnetism piece to that, right? Following what's alive has this like resonant energy that can be felt, right? You know the difference of someone who, an example is like someone who is just like reading off of a script or even just like reading off their slides, right? It's scripted and it's dry and it's boring and their personality isn't in it. They literally, like a robot could be doing it. And so following what's alive requires you to be in connection with yourself. It requires you to be in connection with your intuition and to actually like channel and like co-create with like God's source, the universe, whatever it is, and to truly like be in this like open state of receivership, right? And to not be attached to something rigid and like structured that you had already created. And all of that is magnetic because it shows that you're human. And specifically like in the online business space, there's a huge trust deficit growing. Many of us have been burned, right? We've been sold these shiny promises and they're empty, right? There's the bait and switch kind of master classes. We've all probably been a part of them where like you're said this is going to like fix all your problems. You sign up and then it's just like leaving you with more questions than answers. And then there's a lot of like dissonance, lack of integrity in the online space too. And that's probably just going to get worse with like the use of AI and stuff. Oh gosh, that's a whole other conversation. we're not going to go there today. But the point is like, it's really magnetic to be human. And part of being human means following what's alive. And following what's alive requires you to be vulnerable. Following what's alive requires you to trust yourself. Following what's alive requires you to let go of things that aren't working and to be in that constant kind of like place of refinement. It also asks and invites you to really get clear on what you're devoted to. And I don't want to use the word disciple or discipline because people have an aversion to that, but it is really like, what are you discipling? What are you going after? What are you committed to? And so it gets blurry there because you're probably thinking, well, Nicole, you just said to like follow what's alive. And so if it's not alive, then you should change your mind. But if you're committed to it, so like where and when and how you decide to actually follow through on something versus like letting something go. That is a really big question. And that is something that I can't answer for you. It's something that you need to practice discerning through different experiences. And this comes with like learning how creation moves through you, because you'll start to get a feel of like when perfectionism or procrastination is coming in. And those are nervous system responses. So it's a call to basically tend to your animal body in some way. It's also an invitation to really begin noticing your own like mental chatter, the monkey brain, and the beliefs and the stories that you're holding, and beginning to discern if the urge you have to jump ship on something and to course correct is truly in alignment with like your energy, or is it actually a protective mechanism to ultimately protect you from being rejected. And what I mean by that, and like I have examples, well, I do, but like an example is like you get really excited about this offer, you begin moving forward on it, right? Maybe you're beginning to write copy, maybe you have the sales page made, maybe you even put it out there and it's crickets. Okay? There's that moment, and you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, where you're like, oh shit, it's not working. And there's this choice point of like, do you want to keep going? Like if it feels like crickets, like do you want to back down and jump ship on the offer? Or do you want to start talking louder? It's this question of like, do you have 2 feet in the boat, or do you just have like 1 foot in the boat and you're easily wavered on where this is going to go? Or are you recognizing that the part of you that does want to jump ship, like if your answer to that is like, no, I don't have 2 feet in the boat, or no, I have 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and like, I'm just going to trust whoever comes in and it's meant to be, like if you're in that kind of la la land space, which is a very like feminine, like flowy place to be, get really, really, really curious and honest with yourself. Is that urge to jump ship and to pivot and maybe give up on the offer because of your own fear that nobody's going to sign up? And if that's the case, then the invitation is to start building your capacity and your resilience towards rejection, right? Because that's the issue. Like you haven't actually lost connection and like that alive spark with the offer. It's that the fear of being rejected, the fear of not having signups, the fear of having crickets is now weighing all of that down. And it's almost like dimming your spark for that offer. So again, that's something I can't tell you, right? Because there are also going to be times where it truly just isn't in alignment anymore and it doesn't light you up. Another piece to this is just weaving in like masculine and feminine energy into this. And I just talked about that, right? That can be a really like feminine place to be in. Like, I'm just going to like wait and see. I'm just going to trust. I'm just going to be open to receive. And however the outcome is exactly meant to be, right? Like we've all been there. And that can be really sloppy too. We need masculine structure for our feminine to flow. And I'm laughing a little bit because obviously I've been calling this series like Restructuring My Business Out Loud. And I almost wanted to start this episode with saying like, if you haven't noticed, I really don't have much of a structure to my business. And I do, but I don't, right? Like I don't in the sense that I don't necessarily have like this really rigid business model that's all laid out. And I'm definitely not the person that is going to say like, well, this is what I'm doing in like Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Like I just don't work that way. And I've really given myself a lot of permission to not work that way. But there's other things that I've implemented in my business to create that like masculine structure. The best example for this, right? If you think of a riverbank, if you just have water flowing and there's no river edges, the water is just going to like seep over it's just going to be a muddy mess. If you have the river edges, like the river banks, then that water has somewhere to go. And so this is where that idea of like devotion and discipline and commitment is really, really important. You need to get clear on what you're committed to, right? And that also, this kind of leads to the next point of getting clear on how you define success. And likely that means redefining success, because I would argue that most people are by default on autopilot, still running on society's definition of success. But I want you to get really clear on like, what is your definition of success? I will feel successful when? That's a really big question. Answer that, but then like go layers into that yourself why and keep going. Or if like a money goal comes to mind, and again, it might, because we've been conditioned to measure success based off of productivity and metrics and money. And so if like the goal, just pulling this out of my butt, like if the goal is like, I'll feel successful when I make 10K in a launch or something. Again, there's nuance to that. Like, is it really about the money, or is it what you can do with that money? And what does that money give you access to? What does that money mean for you? So again, these are really big questions. I can't answer them for you, but beginning to sit with them, beginning to just bring more intention to kind of the motives behind what you're doing is really, really important. And on top of defining success, and this can be like different for each offering potentially, right? You could have like a bigger umbrella of like, what am I actually going after in like the bigger context of my business, but also like for each offer, get really clear on what your intention is. And it's not always going to be about money. It might be about impact. It might be actually meeting your own need to like collect data and like get a pulse check on what's going on in your community. It might be to hone in on a specific skill and actually get the experience to gain confidence in something, right? There's a whole list of reasons why you might be doing something, but also get clear on what your terms are. Like, what are your non-negotiables? So again, back to the money example, like, yeah, 10K in a launch would be really cool, but I'm not willing to do that if that means I have to like bust my ass, do things that don't light me up, do things that don't feel fun, grind and hustle my way on like social media, miss bedtime with my kid, and like not be able to, right? You get the idea. Like, get really clear on what you're not willing to do in service to that goal. Again, I can't answer that for you. These are things that you just have to sit with and like marinate on. And another piece to success is getting clear on the benchmarks for success. Because if you're like me and you've been an overachiever and a perfectionist and a good girl your entire life, you are probably moving those benchmarks, right? So as soon as you actually like meet a micro goal, you're moving it, not even realizing you're doing it, but then you end up feeling like you're never enough. You feel like you've never actually arrived. You feel like you aren't actually moving forward. And that's absolutely not true, because I'm almost positive you are moving forward. I would actually argue that you listening to this, you breathing in this moment, you showing up to yourself and thinking about any of this is you moving forward. And so this is that whole idea of like the gap in the gain. And I don't know if you've read 10X is easier than 2X by, forget the name. It's a popular book and it's not perfect, but the premise of it is good. And I'm not talking about 10X is easier than 2X, although that is actually really important in this. So I do recommend you read the book, or at least get a synopsis of the idea. The idea is that 10X, going after a goal that is like 10X, is easier than going after a goal that's 2X. And the rationale is because if you're going after something that is just like double what you're already doing, the pathways to get there are almost like limitless. And then you're often in like analysis paralysis, like decision. Oh gosh, like you can't, you're just overwhelmed and there's too many options. So you sometimes like freeze, or you end up doing busy work, or you're just spinning your tires and not actually moving the needle forward. But if you get clear on what that like 10X goal would be, then the pathways are likely just like 1 or 2 or 3, right? There's way less ways to actually go towards that goal. I think an example that was in the book is like the guy's son wanted to be some high elite athlete or something. And so because that was the goal and it wasn't just to be like some like college athlete, they knew early on that they needed to have like an elite level coach, right? Like the pathways to get there are just different. And in the context of business, like if you're looking at making, say, 3K to 30K versus 3K to 300K, the kind of offers you create, the kind of people you call into your work, and the way you price everything and the energy that you have to like embody to move towards 300K is way different than 30K. So anyways, I ended up going there. That's just a little pin drop. But anyways, in that book, they also talk about the gap and the gain. And I think there's a whole book on the gap and the gain, but I haven't read it. And I pulled this quote because I think this is really important. Talking about like the gap and the gain and coming back to what I was sharing about getting clear on the benchmarks, because if you're constantly moving them, you're essentially stuck in the gap. You're stuck in this energy of never feeling like you're enough. It never feels like you've done enough. There's scarcity, there's insecurity. But when you actually like look back at how far you've come, when you look at the gain and like the amount of distance you've traveled, there's momentum. And there's empowerment there, right? You don't feel like a victim. And so the quote is, every experience has something to offer. Every moment you learn and become better, not bitter as a result. Regularly referencing your own progress also helps you truly embrace your own game in life. You're not competing with anyone. You're on your own unique path, right? So that's the energy of being in the gain instead of the gap. That was a lot. Okay. This is why I have notes. So moving on to my fourth bullet point, and there's 5. So we're moving on. So circling back to whatever definition you created for yourself around success, circling back to what you've decided like you're going after. I want you to sit with that over the coming days, like bring intention, bring your awareness to those thoughts and those dreams. Notice when your desires come up, what you're doing with them. Like notice if you say, well, I can't do that, or that's impossible. Or notice if you're negotiating, like, well, I can't do that until, or like so-and-so could do that because of blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is, right? I feel like what I hear a lot is like around timing. Well, like I can't do that until my kids are older, or I can't do that until I have more followers on Instagram, or until my podcast has whatever, more downloads, or right, you're adding conditions to the desire. And so I want you to get really, really, really curious and be that radical witness to your own inner world and noticing just the voices that are coming up for you as you're sitting with your desires and your dreams and what you have decided is like success for you. And what's really, really fun about this is that kind of experiment is going to help you get really clear on where your edges are and where your learned limitations are. And when you can begin to illuminate those learned limitations, they often naturally just get to dissolve because you get to detach from them and be like, oh, wait, like, but do I even believe that? You get to get curious about like where that belief or story was even coming from. And this leads me to bullet point number 5, which is all around this collective wound that I would argue many of us have around like hyper self-sufficiency and hyper individualism, right? Again, very colonized way of thinking to just be doing things on your own, right? And we've kind of been taught this literally from day one and in school, like you do tests on your own and like you're just supposed to be able to like succeed on your own. And we've also been conditioned to believe that like if I win, you lose. And there's this constant hum of competition because of that. And then there's also this feeling of like, well, if I do lean on someone, if I do get help and support, or if I like do this with someone, then it almost feels like you're cheating. I know I've experienced that, right? Like even soundboarding different ideas. Like let's say you're in a group and you're getting these different ideas, it almost feels like, well, who am I to like now run with that idea if it actually like came from someone else? But I would also say like, who are you not to? Like you each can run with that idea and it will be done in your own unique way. Another example of this, and I've definitely experienced this with copywriting, when I've gotten support with my copywriting, or even the times I have played around with ChatGPT, and I don't use ChatGPT to write for me, but I do use ChatGPT to soundboard and expand my thinking. And sometimes that feels like I'm cheating. And ChatGPT is a bad example because that's not actually helping us with this wound of self-sufficiency. What I'm talking about here is like actually leaning on community. We heal in community. And so all the stuff we just talked about before this and in the earlier episodes around beginning to just notice where you are potentially gaslighting yourself, noticing where you are squashing your own desires because of learned limitations, noticing where you are basically oppressing yourself in some way and saying like, I can't do that, or like, I shouldn't do that, or that's not possible for me. All of that dissolves when we are in community, because community helps us widen the permission field, right? It helps us see more than just our like, I don't know, we have our blinders on when we're in that like hyper self-sufficient individualistic mindset. We can't see what we don't know. We get stuck in this like single story. So being in community helps widen our perspective, gives us more nuance, also gives us more ideas and things to respond to. And there's also power in being with people who can celebrate you and offer solidarity and soundboard with you. There's also something to be said about like the efficiency of being in community, because you get to lean on kind of the lessons that other people have experienced, right? Like maybe just as an example, like if you're in a community of people that are building businesses, you get to learn, oh, well, like I used this website template and loved it, or like I that's a bad example, but like you get to learn from other people. And there's something really, really beautiful about that. There's also something to be said about being witnessed in your own transformation. I think this is something, I don't talk about this enough for the amount of energy it takes up in my mind, that socially, culturally, collectively, we have really lost the art of completing a rite of passage. And what I mean by like rite of passage is really anytime you're going through this like transformation, right? So birth is a beautiful example, right? That's a really big rite of passage for a woman because she's literally leaving maidenhood and entering motherhood. And that experience needs to be witnessed. This also happens in business. Like as you are like emerging with different identities. Okay, this is an example. This is a bad example, but it's an example. Like if you just came out of a training and you now have this identity of being a new facilitator because you have this new modality, like it's really important that you're witnessed in that transformation. You all like, okay, identity is twofold. It's how you see yourself, but it's also how others see you. And we're forgetting that part. We're forgetting the part about being seen by other people. And I think, again, if you've had a journey that has any similarities to mine, there's this feeling of like, well, then I'm just like depending on external validation, and I don't want to have to need external validation. And this is different. Like it's your birthright to be seen and recognized and witnessed in whatever you're experiencing. And so I just want to name that here because that is so, so important in all of the stuff we're talking about. I think there's also a lot of people that maybe shame themselves for needing or wanting accountability. And that's the same. Like we are pack animals. We are supposed to do things in community. We're supposed to be leaning on each other's strengths and having community around you as a form of accountability is not a weakness. It's not. Like, please just stop thinking it is. So allow yourself to be with people who can help hold you accountable, who can see you, who can celebrate you, who can offer you solidarity, and like just be that person for you. So when you're meeting that growth edge, or when you're meeting that point of like, I kind of want to jump ship right now, they can help you in the discernment of like, is that actually just because you have this fear of nobody signing up? Or is it because your energy is shifting, right? Like it's hard to discern those things on your own. And I also want to say like this doesn't have to be in like paid containers. Obviously, like if you want to be in like some business masterminds and like mentorships, that's amazing. Here's a little plug for like my happy hour calls. Literally like the cheapest like community coaching you can get. They're $25 each call. But this could also just be with like a biz bestie that you found online. Like set up little accountability meetings for each other to just like hold each other through whatever you're working on. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. Those were my 5 things. I feel like there's always going to be more to come. Like this is a journey, not a destination. And so I'm going to continue to share like little tidbits of my own journey, but it really felt like this little series needed to be completed. I feel like this is silly, but it almost felt like I couldn't move on to something else unless I finished this. So it was important to me to get this episode up. I hope bits of this were helpful. And yeah, I feel like it's also just been such a radical opportunity for me to witness myself in creating this, because obviously I have been forced to bring more intention to some of the things I've been doing because I've been almost accountable to you in the sense of wanting to share this process out loud. So it's almost like I've slowed the process down. And as I'm making different decisions, I'm really getting that opportunity to like sit with myself and like, oh, well, why am I doing this? And it's helped me be more intentional. It's also helped me get more clear on, I think, like the through lines in my business. And it's also just given me a big, bold, wild permission slip to constantly be evolving. I actually think one of the biggest ahas I've received is circling back to what I was sharing in the beginning around like flakiness and stuff. I've really judged myself for being flaky. Like, it feels like I have been in this constant state of evolution the entire time I've been building my business. And if you've followed me for any length of time, like I have worn many different hats, starting out as a like birth doula and like birth coach, turning into a matrescence educator, and then got really nerdy around nervous system and somatic stuff. And then that kind of began transforming into business mentorship, but specifically for mother entrepreneurs because my toes were still deep in matrescence. And then obviously like that has continued to snowball and refine, and it continues to just follow what's lighting me up, right? And so in this season of my business, it's really being fueled by my passion and interest for reimagining leadership and community care. There's a lot of just conversation around decolonization. And I feel like deconditioning has always been a through line in my business, right? The through line has always been how to basically deepen your own self-exploration and unbecome who the world has told you to be. And that started out like in birth, right? Because my own birth journey required me to really break up with everything I was told to do. And then it's continued to show up in my motherhood journey. So I found myself in that arena just because I think it felt safe, but it also was this beautiful connection point. And now it's continued to evolve even further, right? In the arena of like decolonization and stuff like that. Anyways, I didn't want this episode to be about that. But the point of this little share is holding on to that shame around being flaky and the shame around evolving and pivoting so much and putting out so many different offers in kind of a short amount of time. I realized that if I continued to attach to what I thought I wanted, and really what I thought I wanted was just because that's what I've seen from other people who are quote unquote successful, is having this like one and done signature offer that they can rinse and repeat. I realized like I don't actually want that. I want a business that like lives and breathes with every season of my life. I want to have like the fluidity and flexibility to create offers that feel like an expression and an extension of myself and what's feeling alive for me. And again, this is so impactful because that's where the magnetism happens. If I attach to a offer just because it worked once and it has that safety of being quote unquote successful, but my energy isn't there, that's not serving anyone. That's just going to feel really extracting for me. And it's not going to be magnetic and potent and as juicy for you. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. This was part 3. Like I said, this can stand on its own. If you loved it, great. If you haven't listened to the other episodes, go ahead and do that. And keep following because I hope to show my face on YouTube a little bit more. And obviously, I'll continue with my podcast episodes. Jumping back on, because this is a perfect segue to invite you into my current offerings right now. So I already kind of pitched Happy Hour. So Happy Hour is a virtual council for visionaries and change makers and just the crazy people like me who are on a mission to change the world. It's a space for us to be witness, to soundboard. I mean, I really envision this space as an opportunity to unravel all of the nuance that we're holding in our brains, all of the complexity and contradiction and paradox that social media can't hold space for. And I truly believe that if we continue to try to unravel that on our own in our heads, we're just going to keep building knots. And so it needs to be seen, it needs to be witnessed in community. So that's what happy hour is for. Happy hour is also a place for like hot seat coaching. If you have kind of something sticky in your business that you want to be witnessed in, you want a soundboard on, that's a space for that. I'm also offering one-off energy sessions. This is a mix of gently activating breath work and the giant host of nervous system tools I lean on as an opportunity to really step into whatever's alive for you in your business. And oftentimes I don't even think you know what that is. And so that's where the magic of these sessions comes in, is because it helps to illuminate what that thing is. It helps to wake up the strategy and the next right step and like the conviction around where you're going, because it's there. It's already within you. It's being strangled by so many other things, right? It's being strangled by all of the shoulds and the obligations and the noise and the whole host of strategies you've probably tried in the past and all of your previous business mentors, and right, it's that. So we're pulling that back and helping to wake up kind of the truest essence of you specifically around your business. I also am continuing to offer my 8-week private mentorship specifically around reimagining leadership and community care. Obviously, all of the links are going to be in the show notes here. And then I'm also creating a magic mind. I can't remember if I talked about this in the previous episodes. This has been something that I've been sitting on for months now, and it feels really, really edgy, which is exactly why I know I have to do it. But it's a magic mind for fellow neurodivergent entrepreneurs, specifically those of us who are late diagnosed or undiagnosed, late identified, basically those of us that have been masking our entire lives. Likely, if you are in this camp, you have also been an overachiever and you've just spent your entire life to fit in, and you've been gaslighting yourself, right? You've been gaslighting your heart. You've been trying to pretend that your brain works the same way as everyone else's. And for me, obviously, I am on this giant unraveling of my own neurodivergence. And so I'm exploring how this is impacting me in my own relationship to myself, in my motherhood, in my business. And so I really want to create a group experience for us to dismantle and kind of shake up the way we're doing our business so it actually fits with our magic mind. And yeah, I did talk about this in the previous episode, just talking about kind of the lack of nuance that I'm seeing in the online space around neurodivergence specifically. I'm seeing two camps, right? One side of it is it's pathologized and like there's something wrong with you and like you need to be medicated and blah, 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 blah. Or you're just like covering it up and pretending it doesn't exist. Or the other side is like it's this superpower and it's like the neurodivergent people that are going to change the world. And you know what? I kind of want to be in that camp, but also if we're falling too deeply into that camp, that's when we're gaslighting ourselves, because then we're not actually seeing where the challenges are. And so the point of this Magic Mind group is to obviously lean into our strengths, but also learn to accommodate where things are sticky, where things are challenging, and even lean on each other to, again, I mentioned like the potency of community, where we get to widen the permission field. We also get to lean on each other's strengths and learn from each other. So I really see this group as a place to kind of learn like, oh, well, like this has been hard for me, but I do this and it helps, and just kind of learn those little hacks and those little things to be more efficient or optimize or help us ultimately get to build our businesses in our zone of genius. So yeah, those are the things going on in my world right now. Also co-creating a very kind of niche group for doulas and birth workers and mother-serving visionaries who are interested in doing a deep dive in their own inner world, mastering their own inner world, exploring nervous system awareness and somatics, and and really leaning into the fact that the number one skill of someone that is supporting and holding space for someone else is being able to hold space for yourself. So I'm really excited for that group. Still in the early days of creation, but more on that to come. And obviously just like follow me because I follow what's alive. And so there's been a lot of movement in my business, and I foresee more movement to come because this is how I'm just getting more and more clear on what lights me up.